When someone learns it, even when I learned it, it's really stressful and disheartening, and there's a lot of tears because you've got this beautiful animal, then you ruin it. You know, you ruin it, you take it apart, you skin it, you wash it, and then you've got to make it look nice again somehow.
Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Eleanor, and each week I take you to a craft person's studio, interview them and show you their work. This week we're headed to Hastings to meet with ethical taxidermist Jazmine Miles Long. I had to think a lot about how to introduce this video because I know taxidermy is quite a controversial topic. However, I believe it is best to hear people out before making a judgment, and I am really glad that I did that because Jazmine has a whole new perspective and approach to share about taxidermy, and actually her enthusiasm for it and her approach has made me really fall in love with this discipline. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button and let's get into it. Hi Jazmine.
Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. We're here in your studio in Hastings.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We know each other through the Art Workers Guilds. Was it a talk last year during Master Rob's year?
Yes.
Right?
Was it? Where are we? Yeah, no, it was like October or November in 2024.
Yeah, that's right. I feel like we have some specimens behind us that already sort of hint at what you do, but if you want to give a sort of introduction to your craft.
I'm a taxidermist and I create taxidermy for museums, private clients, galleries, and I create artwork myself, you know, self-directed projects. And all the animals I work with have died from natural causes. And so I call myself, in the museum context, often an ethical taxidermist, just because it helps people understand that maybe my work is different to what they perceive taxidermy to be. Often it's related to hunting, collecting, and this kind of historic image of taxidermy. And although I find the word ethical problematic, and it's a bit of a buzzword, I still use it because it creates conversation. And for me, my work is all about, it's the whole process. It's the taxidermy itself and the animal, where the animals come from, the story of the animal, trying to create something respectful and representative of that species. So I don't often do kind of like bits of animals or anthropomorphic work. It's very naturalistic. And also the materials I use and the processes I use are as kind of sustainable and natural as possible. So ethical taxidermy for me is the whole thing, not just the fact the animals have only died of natural causes, and that could be flying into a window, dying of old age or illness, being hit by a car. And I do work with zoo animals that have been euthanized if they've been incredibly ill. So for that reason, I'm comfortable with that. So if the animal cannot continue, I'm comfortable with those reasons. And that's what my work is.
Yeah. And there's also this sort of like artistic element, because I think, as you say, you're touching on the sort of sustainability, the educational as well is a big part of what you do, especially in the context of museums. But then there's sort of artistic, I think for me, particularly the kingfisher, where you've got this sort of really bold way of displaying him and you make your own frames. Like that's a whole different side as well of your practice that we'll get into.
Yeah, there's like maybe three sides. There's the very classical museum stuff, which is often representing a species and a behaviour, and that's used for education or science. So I do things for display in museums, but also for collections. So if a rare animal is found dead, they might want to preserve that for science, and that will be a whole different reason to something that's on display showing behaviour.
Yeah.
And then there's these kind of colourful, simplistic cases are pieces that I make for homes often, private clients, and for myself for galleries. Sometimes they have a story behind them and they're more conceptual. And then I also create sculptures as well, where I make the animals are within these cases with groundwork, so plants and things. And it's the work I make for myself, the artwork, is always about the provenance of that animal, or maybe how it died, or where it was from, or some story with the species, rather than looking at the behaviour of the animal, which is more what a museum piece would be about.
Yeah, and I think, you know, sort of back to what you said at the beginning, a lot of people associate it with, you know, particularly, I think there's like one National Trust house in particular, where it's like you walk in and it's like full of taxidermy, and you kind of associate it with that like really sort of the hunt and the trophy taxidermy, etc. And it's like it does have such a bad association, but it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to, and it still does have association with hunting. There is still hunting, there is still trophy taxidermy. You know, they are all the same thing, the same craft, but where it's coming from is very different. And the taxidermy in museums is, I believe, still really important to keep today. I do lots of restoration and work with museums to restore these pieces, and even though they will have been killed, and I still believe that they're so important to care for now, otherwise what was the point? And you know, just the stereotypical taxidermist is bound with like colonialism and like hunting and taking from somewhere where you shouldn't, and all of that is part of the history of my craft.
And I guess that's the thing, is you could have a taxidermy of a species that's now extinct, and it might have been hunted into extinction, and maybe that specific animal was actually killed through hunting, but you restoring it, you know, decades or hundreds of years later, I don't know what is the oldest piece that you've ever restored, you know, it's also important for a record of that species and for educating, and actually that animal in itself will now be like a beacon of like, okay, this is what we don't want to do, but to have it still be part of that narrative allows for those conversations to happen.
You can tell stories with those objects in museums, talk about, you know, what life was like then, why we did these things. I mean, some species, the very last one of some species, were killed for science. You know, that's the last one, let's kill it and preserve it for our museum. You know, it was actually from kind of a twisted place of like growth rather than an ending. But it's incredibly sad. And
but not everything that humans ever do is for good reasons, but I also think we need to make some allowance for people of previous generations having done something for what they thought were good reasons, and maybe now we know better, but at the time they thought it was good practice. So we need to allow for that sort of grey area as well.
And some people still say, you know, what is the point of taxidermy, because we have, you know, photography and video, but you know, that is actually part of the animal. You know, the skin, depending on how it's preserved, is still like DNA, it's still matter of that real animal, and we then have those extinct animals, you know, actually in our collection, and you can touch them and you can see them. So it's not just aesthetic reasons why we want taxidermy, there's just so many layers to why it could be useful for science, as well as for education and just for beauty.
And I think something that you said to me off camera was that I thought was really interesting and I wasn't expecting. I actually thought that, you know, when museums, for example, commission you, I assumed that they would come to you with a specimen and that you would get it sort of in its, you know, just after it had died. But you actually explained to me that sometimes there's a whole life cycle after the life of the animal. Maybe it's had some experiments on, etc., things, you know, used for science, basically, and then it could have been preserved. And then when funds become available, then at that point, you're working on it. So was it the, there was two monkeys, right? Mum and baby.
Yeah.
Can you maybe
Baboons.
talk about that?
Yeah. So sometimes when I work on animals, so a museum might be doing a display. So an example would be Oxford University Museum of Natural History. Last year I worked on two baboons, a mother and a baby, a raccoon and a koala for their project. Now they have to find these animals, and a museum can't just go to a zoo, give me this animal. We have to wait for it to have died, and often that will have happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, and then that animal will have been put in a freezer, either in a university freezer or a museum freezer. And the animal at
Not
that
at
time,
the zoo.
The zoo will give it to a collection.
But they give it to a collection, not necessarily knowing at the time what project
For
is going to
research,
be
yeah.
useful, just for
Totally.
general research,
Yeah.
and then it's preserved.
Yeah.
Okay.
So museums have connections with zoos. So obviously London Zoo has its own research lab and they have freezers, but then they pass them to other, So the koala, for instance, was part of the research at Oxford University, but not necessarily the museum. So it was flown from Australia when it died in a rescue centre to England, maybe about 15 years ago or 11, I can't remember, it was over 10 years ago. And then it was used for research within the university. And then when the museum needed a koala, they said to the university part of their institution, we need a koala. They had two, we picked one and we worked with it. So they come from all sorts of places. Sometimes a museum wants an object, such as a beaver that I did for Royal Albert Memorial Museum. The curator really wanted a beaver that represented the beavers that were being reintroduced in Devon, near the museum. And so it was about 3 years of waiting, sadly, for one to die, but also they do die kind of all the time. Animals die, but when they die, they have to be autopsied if they're part of a scientific introduction, because they need to find out why it died. And autopsies for a taxidermist means bits missing, the skin's cut up, and it's often so damaging that you can't work on it. But we eventually had this opportunity where a beaver drowned somehow in the estuary. Maybe it went too close to the sea and got salt water. We don't really know, but they knew the cause of death, and therefore it didn't need autopsy. And then there's the opportunity.
Right, before, because
So
they didn't do
I
the
was
autopsy.
asked, but I was asked years ago, could I do a beaver? I said yes, and then 3 years later.
So you've had to wait all this
it's
time.
finished. Yeah. So that was a great project. And then when we found the beaver, or when Holly, the curator, found the beaver, it was a whole year almost waiting with it in the freezer because of COVID. And the fear of the freezer breaking, or, it's so precious. And then when I get that animal, I can't get another one. So I can't mess it up. It's got to work and it's got to be perfect, because I don't have an alternative. So it's really high pressure sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
And you even said to me that, sorry, I've forgotten the specific species of monkey that it was again.
The baboons.
The baboons, yeah. You said to me that actually, like, the mother and baby, they're actually from two different zoos.
Yeah.
And taxidermy is actually, I hadn't really thought that much about the process, but you told me that they actually sort of sent you a photograph of the position they would want it in, and then you're working to that photograph.
Yeah, so it's all about reference. So I'm trying to create something that looks real with literally fabric and then my own sculpture. So if I don't have as much reference as possible, I can't get to the behaviour they want me to portray. So when I work with museums, they always send me photographs or a description, and then I try and find that pose in as many different angles as possible. If I can go and visit the animal, that's even better, get my own photos. So I did, when I was doing the baboons, I did go to a zoo, I can't think where it was, where they had baboons, and I didn't see that kind of behaviour. I saw all the baboons do some crazy behaviour, but some rude behaviour. But
so you might be filming, taking photographs,
just
etc.
and also just seeing how they move. What is their attitude? What's their and they really wanted this particular piece at Oxford. You can go and see it. It's on public display. It's a mother baboon grooming her baby, and she's holding up the leg and kind of like forcefully holding his leg and cleaning him. So it's really like trying to get the weight right and also make the pieces tessellate because they're two separate pieces. There's just lots to think about. Because I think people assume I'm just having the animal and then I just maybe inject it with something or like make it stand up, but it's from scratch, you know.
Yeah, so can you sort of give me like a top line of like the different skills needed to become a taxidermist? Like what do you employ in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so number one, you have to be really good at observing and looking. So it's almost like drawing skills, you know, being able to look at something and then make it. Sculpting, being able to sculpt something out of any kind of material. So we've got...
Because that's actually what you do. You remove the skin, you make the structure that the skin is eventually going to be put back on.
Yeah.
So every, like the movements and the sort of pose that it's going to be in, that is something that you've sculpted.
Yeah, I've sculpted everything, but also it's sculpting in different forms. So you know how you have sculpting from the core out, like when you're building with clay, you have to be able to do that, but you also have to be able to carve in. So there's like you have to be able to understand 3D forms in various different ways, and often that means that people specialise in one area. So they'll either do birds or fish or mammals, you know, or reptiles.
But you do it all?
I haven't done any fish, but I've just done my first reptiles, but I do birds and mammals, you know, and now reptiles, but I also do amphibians and things which have no skin, they're just full sculpture. So that's just like model making.
Okay. So you also, so as well as sculpting, you've got, I'm guessing, skills to do with like colour matching, right? And like painting?
Painting, you have to be good at painting. Again, looking, painting, observing, knowing your materials. You have to be good at model making. A lot of the animals I work with are imperfect, so because of the way they've died or how
particularly roadkill, I would imagine.
Roadkill is always problems, so I have to be good at repair. And I'm talking like even making fake fur out of paper, like anything. There's so many different...
And you told me there was one where you actually had to make a replica foot or something
so
like that?
the raccoon for Oxford Museum has, I think, 2 toes where I had to make them, but also the beaver I was talking about, they wanted to use the full skeleton, so I couldn't use the teeth or the claws. So I had to make them myself.
And what did you make them out of, plaster or?
No, I cast them, because with the claws of a beaver, they're kind of like matte, and you can see the quick, like the flesh inside so I had to do layered resin, so like darker in the middle, light on the outside. Yeah, and I cast every single toe.
Wow.
And they all have their own shape.
Yeah. We've talked about you carving, sculpting, drawing, painting, but you also work with plaster, right? Casting? I think we've got a couple of examples.
So I use casting for loads of different parts of the process, but the first one is when I get a mammal, I will take casts of the animal of areas that I want to have reference of when I'm working. So I do drawings of these areas and take measurements, but the best thing to do is to take a plaster cast. And I do that by... I have to cover the animal in hair conditioner, just my hair conditioner, and then I use alginate because it's quick, because whatever casting material I use actually directly on the animal, I don't want it to take too long because the skin will decompose. So I take an alginate mould and then a plaster cast. So I only get 1 or 2 of these. And then I've got an exact kind of, you know, the shape of the wrinkles, the measurement of the eye to the nose, things like that, or the kind of pads of the paw, because once I've removed the skin, I have the muscular anatomy of that animal, but I don't have the fat. I don't have the shapes that all of these parts of the body make, or the cartilage in the nose or the ears. So by having this reference, it's just a really helpful way for me to copy the original.
That's fascinating. I think that's something which I guess might be a little bit overwhelming. You know, I think I've actually attended the talk that you gave at the Guilds, and I think you did an interview with Crafts Council, I think it was. I read that, and I think even today, you know, prepping this interview, I felt still slightly overwhelmed by just the amount that there is to talk about and the different techniques that you cover. So I think, you know, just... it's perfectly, you know, it is a lot. I don't think I've ever met anybody who does so much, or who has so many different like specialisms like brought together into one thing. So it is a very complex subject.
I think people assume that it's quite simple or like simplistic, but
because we talk about stuffing animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not.
It's a stuffed animal. But the thing is, you can make your practice simple. You can just specialize in one area, and you don't have to do a death mask if you don't want to. It's just about, the work I'm making, especially for museums, has to be as good as possible. And like, although my artistic license is there, every taxidermist has their kind of style. And although the style we're aiming for is life, like true life, we all have our thing. So I really, really struggle with like birds of prey, for instance, because I find my work often comes out very cute, and that's not by choice. And even when I was working on this guy, he
definitely doesn't look cute.
Well, that's because I did him. I went away, I looked at the photos, and I was like, oh, it doesn't look right. I came back, and I figured out what I had to push in the eye line to make the bones give you that ridge. And it just,
you managed to make him look cute?
He was very cute. He was so cute. His whole head was round, his eyes were popping. And like, it's very hard for me to not do that and to work away from that. So although I've got the thing here that I'm copying, because I'm human, my artistic side will just be like, oh, but I'm, especially with mammals, because we are mammals, the way they look at you or the way they move something.
Even just the way that we behave with our dogs, like it's ridiculous just how much we anthropomorphize.
Yeah, and it's really hard not to do that when you're making something. My work always looks a bit cute, but then you get taxidermists that are just really good at birds of prey, and their work just always looks kind of sharp and like angular.
So what species would you say you're best at? Yeah.
What am I I don't know if I'm best at any of them. I think I prefer mammals.
Or like maybe the style that comes to you naturally that most aligns with a particular animal?
I don't know. I think because I always get asked as well, like, what's my favourite animal, or like, what do I like doing? I really struggle with that question, because I'll do anything. Like, I've recently just done some Sicilians, which are amphibians, for the Natural History Museum. They'll be in Tring later this year on display. And I didn't even know what they were, They're a burrowing amphibian. You don't get them in the UK. I had no physical species. I just had images, videos. The babies eat the mother's skin. Like, they're kind of like alien-like to me.
Oh my God.
And I loved making them. I loved it. And I would never have gone, oh, I want to make one of those.
Yeah.
So I just, and even they're a bit cute. I can't help it. And they're fully sculpted. But
yeah, you can't. There's nothing that you can work.
No, so I don't necessarily have a dream animal, or I don't necessarily have I have dream projects and things, but no animal particularly aligns. I have ones which are harder that I think, oh God, I've got to do that, or ones that are easier or less work, for various reasons.
Yeah, and I guess also if you've already done one of that particular specimen, then obviously you have like a reference point already, etc.
Totally,
so that makes it easier.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a really interesting thing as well that you've just said about, sort of, because you did say before that you have the work that you make for yourself that's sort of more artistic, and then the museum side where it's more sort of educational and it has to be less you.
Yes.
And it has to be more about life and about teaching and etc. With the other side, I think what's really interesting on the artistic side is you've got, because it is art, then you've got this sort of narrative. And I think that ties in actually to the fact that you work with yet more materials, because you mentioned silk and wax to me at some points.
Okay. So inside traditional taxidermy dioramas from like 100 years ago, the plant life inside there will be either dried plants, grasses and stuff, or silk flowers. And they were often made by women, millinery makers, but they're like unnamed, and they're not often, it's not often known who made these pieces, and they're often women. Not many people actually know how to do that process anymore, so it's often silk or paper and wax, or just solid wax, hand sculpted. So in 2021 I got a DYCP with Arts Council, and through that, as well as looking at sustainability of my materials, I also learnt how to make wax flowers with artist Annette Townsend, who's an incredible botanical wax maker. I mean, honestly, insane. And I never, she's a master of this material, and just like so tiny and so delicate. And then in 2023, I think it was, I got a Quest scholarship where I developed that, and I looked at silk, and I learnt with Anne Tomlin, who's a milliner.
And who used to be Bridget's business partner, who I interviewed quite early on on the channel.
They use, so milliners, obviously the reason I like learning, when I do training, I don't go and learn from a taxidermist, although...
Well, I think I'm sort of getting the sense that you learn from lots of different crafts and put it all together, right?
Yeah.
And like some of the skills that you're describing now, it's millinery. There's also like some of the skills that miniaturists might use in a way of like creating a diorama and that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. So for what interests me is the fact that all of these ways of making can be brought together into this one thing, and what is the best way of working. So a taxidermist, there's not one way of doing it. There's loads of ways of doing taxidermy, and my method is made up of teaching myself what works for me, what tools I like, but also from going to conferences and things and watching talks, meeting taxidermists, asking what tools they use, and getting little tidbits here and there, and then creating my process. So the way that I learn these skills, like silk and wax, flower making, although it's not got anything to do with taxidermy necessarily, it can come into my practice. Yeah. So I learned how to make plants out of silk, and then these are my hybrid of adding the wax to the silk. And then I did a diorama for the Booth Museum in Brighton. It was my first full diorama, and a diorama is when you make a snapshot in time, and you have insects and plants and animals doing things. And the diorama was designed by the local children, all aged under 10. So it was what they wanted to see. So they wanted slugs and snails and frogs, and I'd never made any of those things. So I had to, carve and cast these things, and I made them out of wax and resins, and all of the plant life in the case is silk and wax, using the techniques I'd learnt. And from this, because it is beautiful, it's incredibly time consuming, but it doesn't give me the real, like fully real, it's more like stylized.
It's beautiful, but it doesn't feel...
A bit like Bridget's work is a stylized version of just like the feeling of nature, right? Yeah. It's like the essence of nature, but I want to make stuff that almost like tricks you.
Yeah.
And I have in the past made more stylized porcelain groundwork, and I did like how that worked, and you have to do it stylized, it has to be fluid. But I'm experimenting now with using resins to directly cast actual plants. So this will be, it's like a sprig, and it has these two leaves. It's so delicate. And this, basically I was on a walk with my son, and he picked this growing sprig, and I thought, what could I do with that? So I put it in some water, and I looked at it for ages, and then I thought, I'm going to cast it. And there's an artist, there's a taxidermist, whose name has gone from my brain, but I will remember it later. And she casts things with resin, and I was like, I'm going to have a go. So I've cast each individual part, and the thing is, it is a copy of the exact leaf that my son gave me on that day. And I'm going to make a piece of art with this. So it's the fact that it's bringing in stories of where I'm finding the plants that go in my work, and how they relate to the animals. So another example of a piece is a badger that I worked on. It's a baby badger. I keep thinking about that badger. Yeah. And his head's actually on the wall over there. I can get it for you. Yeah. But the baby badger drowned sadly in a pond. And so in the case, I've cast nasturtiums from the pond, which it would have walked past before it drowned. And they're made fully in wax in this case, and it's all white, and the badger's almost like woken up and like trying to get out of the case, and it's kind of thinking about display and, you know, our impact and things like that on nature.
And then there's this little guy. He's well behind you, so we'll bring it up so that people can see him. But you were telling me that you've got a whole like story in mind for him because of his origin story, right?
Yeah. So he is a budgie, but he's one that has been bred, you know, in captivity, and it's created this rainbow budgie. And rainbow budgies are colours of budgies, but almost like all mixed together in the way that they wouldn't be in nature necessarily, because it's about different colours breeding and then something happening. So if you bred two budgies together, you wouldn't just get a rainbow budgie. It's kind of like they just happen as a miraculous incident in breeding. I'm not fully sure, and I want to do more research on it.
Yeah.
But I have this beautiful budgie, and it's got all of these colours, and it's very unusual looking. It almost looks man-made, right? Because it's not how you would see it in nature.
It's man-bred, right?
It is man-bred, yeah. So it is a captive budgie. And so I want to create a piece of art with that about human interaction with nature and our impact. And the idea is that it will be flying away with some kind of vine kind of grasping at its leg. And it's an ongoing piece, but I will get there eventually. Because I want to make work that, you know, I want my work to look beautiful, I want the animal to look beautiful, but I want it to make us think about the fact that, I always want it to make us think about the fact the animal is dead. Like, to start with, it is taxidermy, and although I'm doing these beautiful poses, I want you, I always list how it died. So the kingfisher, for instance, I called it still water, but then also that it flew into a window. It's all part of the piece. And just thinking about our position, you know, when people look at taxidermy, it can make them feel uncomfortable because they might think, oh, it's an animal. Is this right? Should someone be making art with the skin of an animal? But then I'm like, well, just think about how it died. Why did it die? You built a house. You know, you have windows. We shouldn't be in charge.
We drive cars.
But like, you know, we don't own this planet. We cohabit with this planet. And so that's kind of what my personal work is trying to create, but in a very still and quiet way. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Okay. I feel like we've given a good introduction of you know, at sort of that initial sort of level of like why you do what you do, the different ways that things come about, and sort of some of the skills involved. I guess now what would be quite interesting is actually like step by step, you know, what is the process? And I'm trying to think, is it better if we do it from a museum commission or maybe like a private commission? What would be sort of
Well, they're
clearer?
all kind of the same.
Yeah?
They're all the same. You have your pose and you have your end goal.
Okay.
So I'll talk about it broadly.
Because one thing that we do need to mention as well is that museums, as you said, like you'll have like research facilities, etc., that keep animals.
Where the animals from.
But you also have animals because people are aware that you do taxidermy and you do it on animals that have been found, and so you actually have some animals as well yourself that you keep, and then if someone comes to you with a project for a particular animal and you happen to have it, then that means you can start that process with an animal that you already have.
Yes.
Say I contacted you and said I would like a taxidermied kingfisher. Yeah. So what's the process?
So first of all, we would talk about what you want to have created. So do you want me to create a piece of work in a case, or if it's a museum, is it just the animal itself? Will it be going into an exhibition? So first of all, it's the pose. So we have to think about the end piece right at the beginning before I even touch the animal.
So is that like, because you said you sometimes visit animals in a zoo, but it could also be like reference imaging, right?
Yeah, it's like finding, but also if it's a piece that's going to go into someone's home, for instance, am I creating, because I make all the cases myself as well, am I creating the case that's going to fit within your home? What pose would work best? Is the bird going to be flying? Is it perching? Is it catching a fish? Is it flying into water? There's so many things to think about. If it's flying into water, do I have to make the water? So we agree on the pose first. Sometimes people will say, you choose. I want this piece in my home. This is the space I have. I like these colours, and they'll let me be free and make my own artwork. And other times it's more specific. And then once I know what I'm going to be doing with the animal, I then have the raw dead animal, which I defrost.
Okay. How long does it take to defrost an animal?
It depends. So if it's a kingfisher, it would be like 20 minutes.
Oh,
if
that's
it's if it's a baboon, 24 hours.
Wow.
And it depends what time of year. So
makes sense.
So if it's very cold in here, it takes longer. If it's really hot, I've got to be on it straight away with an ice pack underneath.
Wow.
Because I want to keep it cold. Heat creates bacteria, and that can create the skin to decompose, and slipping is where feathers or fur kind of slides off of the layers of the skin.
Okay.
And that's your worst nightmare as a taxidermist.
Okay.
Yeah, if that does
So you
happen,
want to catch it before that happens?
Yeah, if that does happen with a bird, you can put the feathers back on later, but that takes years of practice.
It's almost like a needle, like it's almost like sewing
each individual.
Yeah, which is possible, but whereas I can imagine with fur that's not really possible, is it?
With fur, I can fix areas of fur. You don't want massive amounts of slipping, but you can rebuild using the hair, or sometimes I'll make fur with Japanese tissue, like make my own fur, like match the colour and layer it up.
Make fur,
yes.
With Japanese tissue?
Yeah, Japanese tissue paper is so fibrous that you can kind of comb it wet and create like fluffy fur fibre.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
and feathers, you can make feathers out.
This is what I find fascinating. Like, I just cannot believe the amount, like, of different materials that you use, and like, I feel like you've got to be so creative and like, oh, like, here's this random material. I'm sure if I do this to it, like, this will happen, or like, you can see past the material to a new potential use. And I think...
So Japanese tissue is used in bookbinding.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But it's, and conservation as well. It's used in conservation.
But yeah, so if slipping, you said,
slipping,
right? Yeah, if it does happen, there are ways of fixing it, but ideally you want to avoid it.
And the only reason I know how to fix it is because I work with some animals that are so rare and they've completely fallen apart. I don't have another one. So I just have to make it work. So I have to skin it, I have to fix it. But, other taxidermists might be like, no, that one's not good enough, I'm going to move on. It just depends what, for me, I won't give up. Some people might think I'm completely insane, but I would rather make that animal.
But I guess for you, because, I mean, from the way that you talk about animals and the way you talk about, like, wanting to be sort of respectful to the animal and wanting to be sustainable, etc., like, I can see why you personally feel motivated to use the animal come what may.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking if I can't. Like, it's just horrible. Or if I see a dead animal and I can't fit it in my freezer, again, I just feel so guilty, which is ridiculous because, I can't put all the badgers that die in my freezer. They're so big. And loads die, all the time. Oh, in Hastings, they get hit by cars. Like, every other day I get a text. From somebody that's seen one. That
must actually be really, because I mean, it is wonderful that people think of you when they see a dead animal, but that must actually be quite heavy to just be getting quite regularly, like, all of these updates of animals that died.
It's good, and I would love to, like, make the piece where I get everything and I just kind of have them all in a space, and I'm like, look, this is what happened in a year. I would love to make a piece like that if I had the time one day. But, constant animals, So, so the animal's defrosted, and then I have to remove the skin. And the process is different for each species. So we'll start with birds. So with birds, you're very carefully removing the skin from the muscles inside the body, and you're leaving some bones attached. So anything that pokes through skin, like the legs, their legs are scaly. and not feathered. The leg bones stay attached to the skin. The skull, because the beak goes through the skin, that stays attached. The wing feathers are directly attached to the bones. So the bones in the wings stay attached. So it's about...
So actually with the birds you get quite a lot
of the bird. Yeah, but none of the kind of torso or the thighs or the neck or the brain.
Isn't like bird skin like really, really thin?
Really thin. It's like a wet tissue paper sometimes, so you can just make loads of holes. But the good thing about birds is they're covered in feathers. So if you make a little hole, they're fluffy, you know, you can't see it. If you make a hole on a mammal with short fur, it looks awful, and you have to sew it up.
So it's a trickier skin to work with, but also because of the feathers a little bit more forgiving.
It's, and also almost the anatomy of a bird is quite robotic almost. It's very, so with the bird's body, I carve that out of balsa wood, so it's like a solid shape, and then the wings and the legs and the neck are wire and natural fibres.
Like a wire armature kind of.
Like an armature. So, but the main chunk of the body is a solid shape because they only have movement kind of in the end of their spine, like where the tail is, but the rest of it's fused. Whereas with mammals, you know, our spine goes in all sorts of shapes. So when I'm making a mammal, I need a material that's bendable, movable before I kind of finish it. So I use a soft wooden shaving called wood wool to kind of scrunch and build it up. So that's what I was saying about sculpting out in. The birds are carved wood, solid lump of wood, and the mammals are building up the muscles from the middle out.
I see. And then with the birds, you're also doing armature.
Yeah, wiring up the skin. And with the birds, their feathers are in a specific order. So once you've wired up the whole bird, it's about feathering, layering the feathers into the right place because they're not feathery all over. They have lines of feathers called feather tracts, and each feather needs to sit on top of the other. So it's about going through with tweezers.
So you've got to be really good at understanding the anatomy of that particular animal.
Yeah, and where the skin feather tracts should sit on the body. And that's why when you see some taxidermy, you know, their shoulders might look wrong or the neck's too long. You know, skin is stretchy. You can overstuff it, you can get it completely, it can shrink. So it's just about really understanding the way that animal moves.
Okay, so we've got the skinning process once it's defrosted.
Yeah.
You've got the building up or carving or, you know, making the structure that you will eventually be putting the skin back on.
Yeah.
But, and I think you said that with birds, you told me off camera that we don't need to do another process with the skin, but with mammals you do, right?
Yeah. So with birds, the skin is essentially rawhide mostly, which means it's just, you skin the animal, you clean the skin thoroughly, removing all meat, all fat, completely from the inside, but then you're just washing it and drying it. You're
actually
not
washing it?
Oh,
just
yes.
Like soap water?
Yeah, I just use pure soap. You can use
It's one of these things,
other things.
because all of the process that you've described sound quite complicated. Like when I said,
Just
you just soap and water, that sounded like I thought, I'm going to sound stupid.
No, yeah. So, but the thing is, you know, that you could do that with mammals too if you wanted. If you're working on small mammals, you can keep it simple.
Or like a mouse or something.
Yeah, you could just use soap and water. I mean, it depends on how it's going to be kept, you know. The problem with rawhide, you know, with the bird skins, they're then so susceptible to humidity because if rawhide gets wet, it can rot, it can distort, it can, all of these things.
I see.
Yeah. Bigger birds, you do have to tan the skin, which is a process where you're changing something from skin into leather.
And that's the same, I mean, you know, that's the same as like leather that's used for shoes or for making bags or
so that's mammals, but
making a fur coat or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So with the mammals, I have to tan my skins just the same as you would to make a handbag.
Okay, and so can you explain like the sort of like reason for why we need to do that, but also like how it changes the skin, like what is the process?
Yeah, so it makes it more durable to humidity and things that might damage the taxidermy long term. It makes it stronger, so when I'm manipulating it, it's not going to start slipping, as I said decomposing, things like that. It just makes it more permanent. It makes the fur within the skin stay attached in the layers of the skin, and the tanning process essentially, so you're changing the chemical compounds of the actual skin and making it something else. And historically, you know, if you think hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we would have made tents out of we'd skin an animal, we'd eat the animal, and we'd make a tent out of the skin. And then one day we were making fires in the tents, and we realised, oh, this has made the tent waterproof now. And that's because the smoke, the tannins in the smoke, were entering the skin and bonding and making the skin waterproof. And then from that, different ways of tanning kind of happened.
Are there different types of tanning depending on what the end use will be? Like, say, like you're tanning the leather because it's going to be going into shoes versus it's going to be used for like making car seats, like upholstery, versus taxidermy. Like, are there different tanning processes for each end use?
Yes, so there's many different tanning processes, and there's kind of big commercial faster processes as well, like chrome tanning in the fashion industry. Is using heavy metals and things which it's associated with not a good environment, having a bad environmental impact. And I know that the leather industry is like changing and looking at all of their ways of making. But for instance, if you wanted to make a pair of shoes, you're going to want an animal with thick skin, so cows to start with, and then you're wanting a tanning method that's going to make it really durable and strong. And there's lots of different things you can do to the skin to create either a very soft and thin skin or a very durable skin. And taxidermists, we don't need it to be waterproof, for instance, but we want it to be durable, long term, that it will exist in 100 years or more.
And you want it to be supple so that you can work with it.
So I can still work with it. Yeah, I don't want to use a tanning method that will make it so hard for me to sculpt into shape. So taxidermists generally use either alum tanning, which is like an aluminium tanning, or they use different brush-on tans, which are commercially made for taxidermy, which are adding chemicals to the skin. And all of these methods will create something supple, easy to work with, and thin.
Oh yes, because I think that's something that you explained to me, again off camera, and you explained to me that you can have skin from the same animal, but depending on the tanning process that you do, it's going to thicken or make slim down the skin. And I think that's something I definitely did not realise.
So there's loads of different things you can do to play with the skin essentially to get your end goal, and the taxidermy methods are refined to get that end goal. And through my research in my taxidermy, like over the last 5 years, I've been trying to find the most sustainable, eco-friendly, natural ways of working, not just for the taxidermy itself and the museum work I'm doing, but for my health as well, because I don't want to work with chemicals. I don't want to be working with things that can harm my body as much as possible.
So we've defrosted, skinned,
and
made
now,
the structure, we've tanned the skin.
But when I make the structure, I've got the body of the animal on the desk with me, so whether it's bird or mammal, and I'm taking drawings, I'm measuring, and I'm essentially creating a copy of that, whether it be carved out of balsa wood or whether it be made out of the wood wool around a wire frame, or clay or plaster or whatever. I'm building up the shape so that it's going to fit exactly. So if you imagine I had a glove that was perfectly made to fit my hand, I'm essentially making the hand, and then the glove is just going to go on and look exactly right. Because as I said, the skin is stretchy. If I was stuffing it, which is the origins of taxidermy, originally they were wired up and then kind of stuffed with natural fibres. And that's where you get that word from. But now we make a solid sculpture and the skin goes on top, and it gives you a more anatomically correct piece. So I have my skin, I have my sculpture, and then when my skin is preserved, either tanned or not, I'm then sculpting it onto this form to make the animal. So I'm moving the skin around, I'm sewing it on, I'm pinning it in place. If I'm working with feathers, I'm making sure they're correct.
Oh yes, actually. Yeah, you do have the pins in him. Why do you have the pins on him?
So he has pins because it's holding different feather groups in the correct place.
Oh yes, what you were saying earlier about the different like
yeah.
anatomically correct placement.
So if you imagine, you know, his skin is like really floppy fabric. Oh, that's my mic. The skin is really floppy fabric, and if it's like not on the shoulder properly, he's going to look wrong. So it's about getting it in the right place, and then if it's not behaving, pinning it. And you know, often I don't have to use too many pins, like, and I try not to use any on the face, and also with the chameleons, you can see I've not used any pins. If you're putting a pin in skin, you're making a hole, and as the skin dries, it might get bigger.
I see.
Yeah.
So you can do it with birds because they're covered in feathers, but with the chameleon, because it's just the bare skin, you can't.
No.
So do you cut the pins, or do you remove them after it's dried?
They get removed,
or?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So they're just going into the balsa wood body inside.
Yeah.
And then I'll just twist them back out.
And so how do you then attach the skin into place? Is it glued?
So on the birds, it's not, it's just dried, but there's a wire that runs up both wings, down the legs and up into the head. So I'm wiring those bones into position.
Yep.
And that wire stays inside.
And then you pin it, and then once the skin is dried, you remove the pins.
Yeah, and it's dries, solid.
Okay.
Because it's rawhide as well. It's really,
yes.
It's going to become, leather has more flexibility. So with mammals, you are often gluing the skin.
Right, that's what I was going to ask, because then you can't pin if it's already tanned. I'm guessing it then doesn't dry.
You can pin mammals if they're furry, and you pull the pins out.
But then, so does tan skin also dry into the shape, or is it more like you glue it, pin it so that
depending on the tanning, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not gonna. Yeah, it's not gonna.
There's so many variables.
Yeah, there's so many variables, and the only way you can do taxidermy is by practicing, because you know, I could show you a method, and you'd be like, I didn't like that. You know, it didn't work. It's all about physically doing it, and I think when someone learns it, even when I learned it, it's really stressful and disheartening, and there's a lot of tears, because you've got this beautiful animal, then you ruin it. You know, you ruin it, you take it apart, you skin it, you wash it, and then you've got to make it look nice again somehow. And it's just about,
I don't think I would be able to do that.
When you start,
the thought of it sounds so stressful, actually.
It's teaching your hands all of those processes, and then you're not thinking about those processes. It's like, that's why it's a craft, because it's all in my hands, it's all in the back of wherever it is in my brain that does stuff without me thinking. So now when I'm doing taxidermy, I could be thinking about something else, you know, rather than like
muscle memory.
I've got to skin. Yeah, and when I'm inside a bird, I can't see what I'm doing because it's sometimes so small, and I use tweezers. The smaller the animal, the smaller the tools. So I skin birds with tweezers. I can't see what's going on, but I just know what I'm touching. Yeah.
It's a bit like a surgeon in a way, also.
Yeah, some of my tweezers are surgical tweezers. You know, I'm obviously using scalpels and
Yeah. Gosh, okay. So now you have put the skin back on, and you've glued it or pinned it, it's dried, sewn, etc. And so then there's the colour.
So then it takes a few, depending on the animal, it takes time to dry. And once it's fully dry, you'll get...
How long can that be?
So with a small bird, if it's a hot day like this, it might take a few days to dry. It could take weeks. Big mammals can take weeks and weeks. You know, it just depends on the size and what is inside and what it is. So if I've used a lot of clay, that can take a while to dry. If I have used some glue, you know, it just depends. But when it's fully dried, you often get a lot of cracking in skin. So for instance, the chameleons, because they have no fur or feathers, everything is on show. And when you have skin without fur or feathers, that loses its pigment. So anything that's uncovered has to be painted. So this buzzard behind, they actually have bright yellow feet, and the beak is actually not black. So I have to, now that's fully dry, I'll have to paint that. So I have to and with the chameleons, everything has to be painted back. But if there's cracking in the skin, I have to rebuild that using either epoxy resins or Japanese tissue, depending on what the project is, what materials I want to use.
How do you colour match? Because I mean, like, you can't really, with colour, you can't really work from photographs. That's never really like true to life, is it?
I have to.
You have to.
So with the chameleons, I've taken as many photos as I can, and I've checked that they look right. But with the bigger chameleon, that one is for Sheffield Museum, and that was someone's pet. So I have photos of it in life, and I've got to follow that. But the photographs aren't the best photographs, so there's going to be a bit of artistic license in that, because I don't have photos of every side. I have photos of him feeling different. So with chameleons, they look different depending on how they feel.
Right.
So that one's going to be coming from me a bit more as well.
Okay. Right. So
because he was faded when I got him, so I couldn't
see.
photograph him and get the correct colours. Whereas this chameleon was quite bright when I got it. For some reason, I don't know about what happens when chameleons die and their pigment and
yeah.
Oh
gosh. Okay.
But now they've completely faded. They're both grey. I mean, this one is bright green.
Yeah.
And this one's like turquoise. You know, really bright. And they aren't like that at all now. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So okay, so you're basically doing like imitation. Painting. And then there's also the eyes.
Yes.
Right.
So the eyes are either glass or plastic, and they are dependent on the species, the size. So when I get the animal, I inject the eyes and I measure the eye to make sure I'm getting the right size.
Okay. You inject the eye?
I inject the eye with liquid because when you die, your eyes shrivel.
Shrivel. I see.
You blinked loads.
Yeah. Did I?
So when you die, you kind of like lose moisture, right?
Right.
And if you've been in the freezer as well, if it has been in the freezer.
Please don't put me in the freezer.
Not gonna do this. If something has been in the freezer for a really long time, the moisture's removed, and that's called freezer burn. So if you've like dropped like a chip in the bottom of your freezer, you'll find it years later, and you'll be like, "What was this?" And it's because all the moisture's been drawn out. So when something's frozen, any liquid in the body over years is kind of removed.
Yeah.
And that makes it really difficult to work with, but it does mean that the eyes will sink and you won't get the accurate measurement without injecting them with water first.
So do you sometimes, like when you get an animal, would you, like before, you know, say someone has found it and so you get it, it's not frozen, would you ever sort of like do those measurements, etc., before you put it in the freezer, and then you sort of like maybe write it on the animal before you put it away? Or?
I always freeze first, and I do that because of pests. So animals have ticks, fleas, you know, whatever, and they will leave that body and come onto me or my dog, you know. So I do it for prevention of pesticides, but also if something's died, it's going to be warm, and if you're freezing it and making it cold, you're killing any bacteria, you know, in that moment, and you're preserving it so that I can really think about it later. Fair. So I would never skin something straight on the off without being frozen first.
Oh, okay.
I know people that have, and then they've, you know.
Really?
Because the fleas will go to the next warm thing, you know. Animals have a lot of parasites.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great.
But the freezer kills them. So
yeah. This again, things I hadn't really thought about.
Why would you?
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Anything that we've missed in sort of like the overall process of? I mean, and then obviously you've got, you know, what's around it, and you know, making the flowers and
of course,
all that sort of thing.
No, I think that's good. I think the drying process, which happens before the painting. I think people think you mount up the animal, you pin it and you walk away, but you're looking after it for sometimes weeks. So with mammals, the skin might move, like dry and open, and so it's constantly manipulating it and pushing it. Same with birds, making it settle how you want. And that's why sometimes if you see taxidermy, you know, it might have like a bit too much teeth or something, and it's because maybe they did the piece, walked off. You know, you've got to... It's like a continual. I can't.
Still got to watch it.
I can't go away for a weekend if I've just done a piece of taxidermy, because I have to come in every day for at least.
And so what, you might be like moving the pins slightly and stuff like that.
With the chameleons, like shutting the mouths, making sure the feet are holding, because I can't put pins in it. You know, really like continually manipulating
until it's dried into position.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. And I'm sure, like, I'm there, like, sort of mind boggled, but I'm sure from your perspective, you're like, oh, we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah. I do genuinely think that taxidermy is such an amazing craft, because it's just like, you could learn minimal. You could just learn how to skin something and mount it, whatever. But it's just so broad and ongoing and exciting.
Well, it sounds to me like it would be the perfect craft for someone who almost like gets bored easily and needs to constantly be learning and constantly wants new things, because it's like you've got all of these different disciplines, you've got all the different species, you've got all the different like types of context, you know, as you said, from like private clients to museums, like you're just constantly being stretched in lots of different directions. So if you're someone who likes routine and who wants to just be able to like specialize in something and then that's it, you're the master, like that's not for you. But if you like to constantly be thrown at the deep end and like having to research something in detail, then it's really gonna pique your interest, kind of thing.
But also just like every animal, it might fall apart. So like you're constantly you know, it's not
like
relaxing.
Engaging every brain cell.
It's engaging, and like you're having to problem solve all the time. And like, you know, things like when I get an animal and they're like, right, we want the full skeleton, and that means I can't use the skull inside my sculpture or the claws which come out of the mammal skin, for instance. I have to make all of those from scratch, and it's thinking of different materials, different ways of doing it. That align with the values of either the museum or my values on what materials I'm going to use. So I'm often making my life harder because I'm not wanting to use certain materials sometimes.
And actually, I think now that we've given this sort of like overview, let's go into the values that lead you as a taxidermist, because you've given this sort of introduction to like, this is how all taxidermists in a way make taxidermy. But now you're basically trying to revolutionize the whole process.
Or just like take it back to over 100 years ago.
Okay, really. So let's get into that then.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, this is the process, you know, this is how taxidermists all make work. You know, they have skin, but modern taxidermists use a lot of plastics and foams, polyurethane foams, which is essentially expanding foam for your home. You know, if you think the stuff you squirt into walls. Yeah. So years ago, the solid forms, to create like a commercial taxidermy business, you'd maybe have a fox and you'd want to make 5 foxes. And to save time, you'd make a cast. And rather than making the bind up, sculpting the body every time, it'd be much easier if you could just cast one, wouldn't it? And have 5 foxes. Right. Put the skin on 5 foxes, different foxes. So commercial companies made these kind of paper mache plaster cast, and then you'd fill it with paper mache, and then you'd have the solid animal and the skin would go on, and it would just kind of make the process a lot faster, rather than having to every time make all the body, make the legs, because it's time consuming. Yeah. And then, you know, they would then maybe be made with maybe plaster, different materials that we had, and then in the kind of 70s, polyurethane foam started becoming more readily available. So then these forms were made with solid polyurethane foam. And it is a plastic, and although it is, you know, plastics we think about, they last forever, right? They're always here. They do degrade and they change, and they off-gas, and they, depending on their conditions, they can shrink or they can expand. So I have used that material in the past, but through my research, wanting to make my work as kind of natural, sustainable as possible, I think my original thought was, if I died and all of my stuff got thrown in the bin, what would be left at the end? And I didn't like the idea of all of these piles of plastic being left, or, you know, if the skin got eaten by moths, what happens to the inside? Can it go in a compost? Can it, you know, what happens? Can it be recycled? So all the materials I use, the wood wool, the balsa wood, these are all natural materials. I use a lot of wool, just straight from, you know, just straight from sheep wool. I use lots of plant fibre.
Well, I guess, so there's things to consider, right? There's like how it's impacting the planet, how it's impacting you as the maker, how it's impacting potentially others in any sort of like, might be secondary ways, how long-lasting the piece itself is going to be. But then you also mentioned to me, again off camera, you said there's also the impact if it's in a museum display case, how it might impact other potentially historically significant objects within that case. So it's actually like your work is really led by those probably five
There's
impact.
a lot, yeah. And so since 2021, through my DYCP, I collaborated with Bethany Palumbo, who's a really incredible museum conservationist. Conservator, museum conservator. And she's currently in Denmark now. And so we have been Oddy testing, which is like, it's a test to see how the materials are off-gassing, and they're put into kind of a time chamber or a compressor chamber. I don't really understand the science of it. This is more Bethany's part of it. So I give her my materials, we test them, and then we look at the outcomes, and we're doing more and more research on what these materials do. So we're testing the polyurethane foam. Lots of taxidermists also use builder's cork, which is an acrylic cork that you put into the corners of your rooms, so that's in taxidermy. And although I'd love to use these materials because they are really light, they're quick, they're cheap, they're easy to use, and they really work really well, they do seem to be off-gassing. And if, through our research, and if they are off-gassing, it means that if I'm making something for a museum and it's going in a cabinet with something historic, if that's got precious metals or things on it, it might change that object. So what's happening there? Also, if the skin that I'm working with is a really special animal, how do we know that this object will be here in hundreds of years if we haven't had plastic for hundreds of years? Whereas we have had taxidermy made with wax, plant fibres, wood for hundreds of years. So I'm just trying to use anything that I know.
You're like 100% sure.
I just don't think it's going to harm other objects. I don't think it's going to harm my object. And I still can get reasonable results with these materials. So I'm just constantly doing research, to working with materials to try and find middle grounds or the best way. And some of the chemicals that taxidermists use as well are toxic.
So that's part of the tanning process, right?
That is part of the tanning process, but also just some of the resins and just there's a lot, borax is commonly used in taxidermy, and that is classed as a very toxic substance now. So there's lots of unknown things, and I didn't know about this before doing all of this research. And in the tanning process, some of the brush-on taxidermy tans are very toxic for reproductive health, especially in women. And maybe, So
that's where you, as a taxidermist, is being put at risk.
I'm put at risk, and also someone that maybe is learning taxidermy thinking, brush-on tan, this is a simple way of me to tan my skins without having to do all of the chemistry, getting all of the pHs right. I just brush this on and I move on. Maybe they don't realise quite, what's in these chemicals, because they're not listed, they're recipes by companies. And although they work really well, what is that doing to me? So that is why I'm now researching natural tanning methods using literally bark, oak galls, mimosa bark, different natural ways of making leather. And
it took me a while to wrap my head around that, because what I didn't understand, so tanning naturally is a process that is already veg tan, that's already a thing. But it hasn't traditionally been used in taxidermy because of the effect that it has on the fur.
And
is
the
that
skin.
right?
Yeah. So the thing is, it can make the skin a bit thicker, but through the process I'm learning with this incredible guy called Matt Richards in America, I'm making these skins that are very thin, very supple, and they're not the problem with using bark tannins, for example, is, they're very dark and they can imprint onto the fur. So if you're making a squirrel with a white tummy, you want the tummy to stay white. Yes. You don't want it to be slightly pink or brown. So it's finding the right methods, and I am getting there, and I have successfully tanned a squirrel skin now using mimosa bark. And the skin is a bit pink, but that's kind of cute because skin is a bit pink underneath if you part a squirrel's tummy.
Wait, it's going to be a cute squirrel.
It's cute. I know. But the fur is white, so it's working.
So you're actually having to test with different kind of plants or trees to try and be able to do the veg tan, but in a way that's not going to affect the colour of the animal.
And also so that the skin is thin enough
Yes.
that I can still turn, say, the leg of a squirrel back inside itself, that it's not so rigid and hard that I can't move it around. Do I have to work it lots to make it supple? And so far it's going really well, but if anyone out there wants to tell me that they've done this before, I don't seem to be able to find anyone that is in the industry of taxidermy that is using veg tan.
Right.
And so I'm trying to tie up all of these areas so that basically you could make a piece of taxidermy knowing that you're not harming the planet, the environment, or yourself. And I mean, this tanning method is so, like, one of the tests is to taste it to see if this is with the natural veg tanning, not with other alum tanning.
Then you'd really be harming yourself.
But it's I'm just saying it's so natural. Like, you can do it with gloves off, and it's just lovely to be able to have a process that you can just say, yeah, this is fully safe. I can pour this down the sink.
Yes.
It's not doing anything. I can put it on my plants.
Like, it could be harmful to you, but then when you pour it down the sink, you don't know how that might be affecting.
It's harmful for further, So when I'm using like aluminium tanning, obviously I'm using such a small amount, but it's always sat uncomfortably with me that I'm still using a chemical and I'm having to get rid of it, and it's...
And it's not like you're in a commercial setup, right? It's like, because, with factories, etc., there's like a whole sort of process to make sure they're disposing of things in a particular way. But you as an individual, don't have the facility to be able to do that.
But also all taxidermists. Yeah. It's just... and anyone can do taxidermy. Yeah. And so I just want there to be understanding that you can make decisions about your practice and find easy ways to do things that aren't too complicated, that you don't have to use certain materials. And I'm not saying that using these other methods of tanning that taxidermists and me already use is a problem. I just want there to be an alternative.
Options out there. Yeah. Can you explain more about that tasting thing?
Yeah. So basically, if you're making a tannin tea, you're trying to get as much tannins into the liquid or the tea. It's called a tea because you can heat it up, and that's just what it's called. You want it to be so, like, I think the word's astringent, but you're tasting it and it's good if you have to spit it out straight away and your mouth is incredibly dry. Because obviously there's tannins in like wine and things and coffee, but when you can drink that, it's actually delicious. Yeah. But this needs to not be delicious. And so if I went out and I found a particular tree and I was like, I'm going to have a go and see if this works, I'd make my tea and then I'd taste it to test the bark content.
And if you're like, oh,
yeah,
then
if I'm like,
you've done it
I've
right.
done it good. But if I could drink it, I'm like, nah, it's too weak. Yeah. If it just tastes earthy, it's not enough.
Right. Okay. And so if we're thinking about like sort of the different elements that you wanted to research alternatives into, so there was the actual like core, like the structure, you wanted to make sure you could have alternatives to plastic. Yeah. Then there was the tanning process. Yeah. And I think, did you mention something about the eyes?
The eyes are, I guess, like, I have like, I'm sure I'll be learning forever, but maybe my next one is, the eyes I use, mostly I use acrylic eyes that are made by a company, and I could make those myself, but really I'd love to use glass. Glass eyes are beautiful, and I can buy glass eyes, but they're also, I would love to learn how to make them myself or collaborate with someone or something like that. That would be like my next, because we know glass is very stable as well. And it's a natural material. So it's, I just want to have the whole package.
Anyone who's watching who's a bit like, whoa, that was a lot. They can watch back, but also they can pause and do a little bit of Googling and then come back to it and be like, okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully.
Yeah. And I think the tanning process for me as well, when I was learning to do mammals, number one, you've got to like learn how to make a sculpture of an animal that looks right. But you've got to do this chemical process to literally change the skin and turn it into leather. And I had a lot of skins falling apart, and it's very
disheartening.
It's very disheartening. And then you're thinking, do I even want to do mammals? And a lot of people don't do them because there is all of these processes, and a lot of people don't do them because there's a lot of chemical processes. But it's so rewarding when it goes really well, and it is so cool to have a piece of skin and then make leather with it. Even if you're not doing it for taxidermy, just the fact that like you can make like it's skin, and it's just such a natural, for me when I'm doing it, it's almost like a very human thing from hundreds of years ago. I know we've been doing this for so long as part of our survival, and it feels just so great to make your own fabric out of skin that you can wash in a washing machine. As well, I was telling you, sheepskin, if it's been veg tanned really well, you can put it in the washing machine. It's just crazy.
Yeah, the mind boggles.
It boggles, yeah. And it also makes it less delicious for insects, which is, for taxidermy, we don't use heavy poisons like arsenic, which is what they used to use historically in taxidermy to prevent moths from eating the taxidermy. So tanning helps with that. It makes the skin less delicious to insects.
And therefore more long lasting.
Yes, yeah.
At this point I have to ask, because this whole conversation is just like, you're clearly insanely talented and intelligent and also have just a grasp of so many different topics, and you're forever learning, and it's like, it's artistic, it's also scientific, it's like, you're learning about anatomy, like chemistry, history, etc., etc. How did you get to where you are?
So it wasn't the plan, if there was a plan. So I did...
Great start.
Yeah. So I did... so when I was a kid, I was always like an artistic kid. So it was obvious I was going to do art. No matter what I do, it's going to be art. So my parents were really supportive of that because they knew that was what was going to happen. So my mum actually took me to like art universities when I was in primary school. Was I? Yeah, I was in primary school.
That's so cool.
Because she wanted me to visualize, and I actually think it's a really cool thing to do. So, she wanted me to see, like, if you want to go to university, because I was the first one to do a degree, My mum did one as an adult, older, while I was studying, but
at the time that you went to uni, no one in your family had been to uni.
No. Yeah. So it was like, right, what do we need to do to get you there? So I went around St. Martin's and all of these ones, which is so funny.
Cool.
It's funny, the idea of doing that with my son now, I don't know.
Yeah.
They must have thought, who is this person? Maybe they thought my mum was going to go. But anyway, so I knew that's what I was going to do. And even when I was at school doing my GCSEs, I loved animals, that was clear, and I loved science, and I loved art.
And you never thought about vet?
Well, I'm very dyslexic, so I thought some kind of scientist, vet or something. I loved biology, and I tried so hard. I even started an A-level in biology, but I just couldn't keep up with all of the writing, and it was just too much. And that, I'm a bit sad. I think if I did it now, I'd love it, but it's just too much at the time. And all through school, I remember doing, I don't know if you did those career path meetings with a business advisor. Yeah. Did you have that printer that printed out did you have it? Right, so it printed out for me after our interview, hairdresser or butcher. So this is my in-between, I think. And I was horrified because I grew up a vegetarian as well. When I was like...
Which is funny because in a way, it's not... Like the way you talk about like pinning, etc.
It's not that far up.
It's not. It's kind of bringing hairdresser, butcher.
Yes, it's okay.
With the vet
butching
science.
But being a butcher is a craft as well. It's got its rules, I guess. But
and you have to be very good at the anatomy.
Yes, but they told me I should not do art. I should focus on science and business because I would get a job.
Yeah, of course.
So that was the advice.
Schools do. Yeah.
So
everyone pushed me to do maths and physics instead of art. I did all of it, but
So I tried doing all of it basically, and then realised I couldn't. So I just did like the art, photography, drama, whatever. Yeah. And then I did A levels, but I didn't finish my A levels. I did just the 1 year and went straight to foundation because I knew from primary school I wanted to go to art school. So I was like, well, I know I want to go to university and do art, so why would I carry on with my A levels? And then I got into my choice, which was Brighton University, and I did sculpture. And when I say that, people are like, oh, that makes sense because I do all this sculpture now. But it was it was totally conceptual. So there was no there was making, but there was no, I didn't learn how to cast there, for instance, or I didn't learn how to make there, but I learned how to think and what I wanted to do. So when I left my degree, during my degree, I was using dead animals that I'd found, but obviously I didn't know what to do with them. They would just be photographed or in performances or videos. So I was playing with this, but I didn't think, oh, I'll be a taxidermist.
It's interesting because I feel like you've just mentioned, oh, like it was very conceptual. And I feel like I've had a few people now who said like, oh, I did a conceptual degree, but I actually wanted to do more of like a making degree. And the same way that earlier when you said like, oh, I'm dyslexic, therefore I didn't want to do this. And I thought I was more of an artistic person. Like, again, that's a theme that's come back up like multiple times. The other thing that also comes up quite often is the V&A and like as like a source of inspiration.
So I wanted to maybe do the V&A conservation and restoration course because when I left, I wanted to carry on making my artwork, but I needed a job. So I thought I would go down the route of museum restoration and conservation because I just loved museums. So I volunteered at the Booth Museum in Brighton, as well as working like Saturday shifts in a corner shop and stuff like that.
And you thought that was going to be in preparation for applying to the V&A?
Yeah, I thought I'd get a portfolio and then I'd apply for an MA in restoration and conservation. But when I was doing stuff at the museum, volunteering, cleaning cases, and I had a go at taxidermy, and the curator there, Jeremy Adams, who's retired now, there's a new curator, Lee, who I've worked with. So the nice thing about the booth is I volunteered in 2007 and now I work with them. I've worked with them for years now, and it's literally my home. It's just, I love it. I love the smell of the naphthalene. I just, the whole place, it's just like my favourite place to go, and anyone that's not been should go. Although it's being shut for a year, I think, for restoration, but they should go. So I was volunteering, and I said I'm interested in taxidermy, and the curator, you know, he had a sense of humour and he was quite traditional, and he was like, well, you need to like get like 60 more years and grow a beard, because he was basically making the joke that I was young and female, and why would I want to do this weird thing. But he was also very supportive, and he did give me a mole and a scalpel which was blunt, and I had to get the skull out, and then we cleaned and washed the skull together, and that was the first thing I'd ever done.
Right.
Because by this point I didn't know if I'd be able to cut open an animal, because when I was about 8 or 9, I became a vegetarian by choice. So meat is not part of my everyday or my life.
Yeah.
So it was a weird choice, that being like, I want to do this. And I didn't even know if I'd have the stomach for it, but I loved it. And then we did an egret together, and then the volunteer Peter, who still volunteers there, that I worked with, he donated a guillemot to me, and these were all the very first things that I got to do at home. Yeah. And I was doing it with old Victorian books, so it was really like confusing, and I was like, what is arsenic? I don't have that to rub on, you know, and I taught myself from those books, and I couldn't get anything to stand up, and so I did a lot of like dead things, like sleeping things.
Are they like, you know, when you said like they used to stuff with natural fibre, whatever, is that the period where they were doing it? So
my method hasn't changed that much, because I was using these Victorian books, because back in 2007 when I started, you know, there wasn't YouTube channels with videos you can watch. There wasn't that many short courses. There's no universities and stuff here, and I eventually found the Guild of Taxidermists, which I joined, and I met taxidermists through that, and I did go and visit various taxidermists in museums. So I volunteered in Edinburgh Museum doing study skins, which are the ones where, I don't know if you know, like Darwin's birds on lollipop sticks. Have you seen those? No, okay. So there's many different ways that taxidermy is used for science, and one of them is study skins, and the most economical way to do it, I have a photo I'll show you later. You basically, you have the skin and you stuff it like a torpedo with a Like it's like this with a stick down the middle.
Oh, I see.
And the label. And then the point is the collections build from that. So you have loads of hummingbirds, so that if a scientist was like, I'm studying hummingbirds from this part of the world, you get them out and you can compare to a different part of the world. So study skins are a whole other thing.
So it's kind of like standardizing the bird
Yes.
in a way,
Yeah.
so that the shape doesn't distract from
It's just like all you're doing with a study skin is preserving the colours and all of the measurements. So before you skin it, you have to measure it, take measurements of organs, and all of that data is with the skin. So I teach that now as well in museums. Teach them how to do study skins.
So that's what you did in Edinburgh?
Yeah, and that taught me to skin. So because all I was doing was skinning and processing.
So you'd been doing some sculpting, even though your degree was conceptual, you were doing some sculpting already.
But then I did, learning how to do this took me about 3 years.
Okay.
And during that time, I was volunteering in as many places.
Sort of travelling
And also working in shops, or I did a lot of visitor assisting in museums, like anything so that I could do both.
Fine, get your foot in the door so you could...
Just
Neat.
pay bills, but also try and make them more interesting jobs. So I worked in the British Museum, Docklands Museum, just
everywhere.
Everywhere.
So at this point you've done your foundation, you've ended your degree in sculpture.
And then I'm trying to become a taxidermist.
And so at that point, are you still thinking about the VNA Masters, or you've kind of like taxidermy's taken over?
Full on taxidermy. Yeah. I was like, what is this job? And I went to a conference, a Guild of Taxidermists conference.
Yeah.
And I met other taxidermists that had this job. And I was like, oh, there are still taxidermists alive today. I would like to do this.
Was that like a light bulb moment?
Yeah, it was, because I just didn't really realise. But then what I realised quite quickly was that there's a lot of hunting. And my problem was I didn't want to do taxidermy if I was going to have things that were killed. And somebody brought me a duck, and I'm so grateful that they gave me they shot the duck anyway. And they thought, I'm going to give it to you because you'll really use it for your work. And it came from a place of love from them.
Yeah.
So I've touched my mic. But for me, it made me really sad. And from that point, not sad to...
So they didn't shoot it so that you could taxidermy it, but having shot it as part of hunting.
And out of love of me, they gave it to me because
and so
they
then
thought,
it's that thing of like, you're not the reason why, but at the same time, the way it was killed does not agree with you.
And I took it because I thought, well, it wasn't killed for me. And the thing is, some people that do ethical taxidermy today, they might do that because they haven't killed it, but it's going to go in the bin, or it's going to be, it's not going to be used. But for me, holding this duck, and the whole thing made me feel so heavy. So from that day, I called myself an ethical taxidermist, and at that time, I couldn't see that word anywhere.
Right.
So I say that I coined it. Whether this is true, I don't know. But there was no one else that was
But for you, that was very intentional, so that you were basically making a statement of intent of this is the only animals I will work with, basically.
And it meant if I got a phone call, I could say, sorry, this is my values. I only work with animals that have died from natural causes. Please work with someone else. And I'm not being rude to them if they want to work with stuff like that. It's just that was what made me comfortable as a maker. I just couldn't bear the thought of it. And then it was like, well, where am I going to find dead animals? I'd had things donated to me from staff at the museum, the Booth Museum before, but then honestly, once you look, you won't stop seeing. So you find things everywhere, and people find things and they look online and maybe they're a vegan and they've never even thought of taxidermy being a good thing. They find a bird and then they'll email me and say, would you like this? I can't throw it in the bin, And that's how it kind of bloomed from there.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you're right, you're working with dead animals, etc. But actually, there's lots of reasons why people who are vegetarian and vegan would feel compelled to want to save and honour an animal in this way, which might, seem...
But if you actually find one and you just see it and you're just like, wow, that is insane. What can I do with this? And so, in the beginning, a lot of my clients were actually people that don't have taxidermy, but they find an animal, think it's beautiful, find me online, realise that's why I used the words ethical taxidermy, just because it's created some kind of, what does she mean? But now it has become something else, because it could just mean that you work with things that, you know, haven't been killed for the purpose of taxidermy, but may have been killed for other reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
You're
so
more
reasons
specific.
such as, because, you know, there's culling happens, animals are killed all the time to reduce numbers.
Yeah.
Those animals are available. And it just depends on the taxidermist, and if they want to do that's fine, but I had very narrow...
Yeah, in the same way that, you know, you're a vegetarian, you don't judge me for the fact that I eat meat.
No.
But, you know, doesn't mean that I should force eating meat.
Yeah, but the amount
vice
of
versa.
conversations I had in the early days with...
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was very difficult. And also taxidermy in general. When I started and I went to my first guild conference, you know, I was like one of maybe 5 women.
I was just about to say the fact that you were a young woman probably played into that quite a lot.
Yeah, and they photographed us because they, like, you know, there'd never been women really. There'd been 1 or 2, there's wives, there's the occasional woman that came through in the 80s, but, you know, really rare. And now I'd say majority women are the new taxidermy generation is majority women. But because of that, there's a lot of sexism, there's a lot of trolling online, there's a lot of... there's still a lot of gatekeeping, you know, so for me to learn all of my methods, I really had to, you know, try and figure it out. And a lot of the things are bits of information within my practice that I've got from amazing taxidermists, but I've never got the full thing.
Right.
And I've had to work it out, find it somewhere else. But if someone asks me how something's made, I will tell them, because they're not going to threaten my practice. You know, this is my practice. And I think the problem that the older generation of taxidermists had when we started coming through was that, you know, we were the new generation, we were going to take the jobs. And essentially, you know, there is competition, but there's so little taxidermy jobs out there and so little taxidermists out there. It's okay, you know. I have a full-time practice, and I have friends that have a full-time practice. Yeah. And, you know, I send jobs to them, and it's okay to be open.
I can see how that experience has impacted your the way that you want to share knowledge and you want to research taxidermy and make that research available. How that's really impacted your approach.
Yeah, no, I really want I want my industry to become more open and welcoming to women, to be more culturally diverse, anything. Because it was so closed off when I started. And it is definitely getting better, but it's still very difficult.
So you've mentioned, going around the UK, volunteering to different museums, but then in conversation earlier you mentioned DYCP and Quest, I think. So like that's kind of part of like continuing your education, but also like facilitating research as well, right?
Yeah. As well as volunteering in museums, I did do like a short course with a taxidermist as well. So the early days of the short courses, now there's loads. If anyone's watching this and they're like, could I do a short course? Yes, just look it up. There's loads of different ones that are accessible now. But yes, so with my work, I really want to get it more into the art context, not just museum context, and I really love my museum work and I want that to continue, but I really want to create my own work and have time to really let that grow. But the problem I'm finding is that taxidermy often isn't even considered a craft. It's just, you know, brushed off as either something gross, something like sensationalist, or just not craft. So I'm always trying to find the things that I can do to represent taxidermy in a different way. And although I really like working on my own, and I would rather just work on my own and not talk to anybody or be the face of anything. I really I need people to see that I'm approachable, I'm a woman, I'm like up for sharing my knowledge, and ways of doing that are through institutions that support craft. So I learnt about Quest, Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust, and I got a scholarship with them, which was amazing, and I'm the only taxidermist so far that's had a scholarship with them, which I thought was really cool. And just to have, when I got that, I really thought I wasn't going to get it as well, because I thought they'll see me, they'll think, no, that's gross. I don't know what I thought. I thought they'll think, no, that's not a craft. But they gave me the scholarship, and I'm so grateful. And what I learned through it, you know, actually the courses and things I did using the scholarship was incredible. But just having the backing of something like Quest is incredible for me, because it helped me realise that, you know, it is valued as craft, and that they see it as craft. And also I got an Arts Council DYCP grant, which is also very rare to get anyway if you're an artist, but let alone a taxidermist. And I use that to do research around my sustainability materials and sustainability stuff. And just having these things behind me is really helping me just build towards, you know, what I'm trying to get at. Being seen in these spaces, being respected in these spaces is really important for people to understand that what I do actually is a craft, and I'm not just...
And I guess where we're going into that territory of almost like a rebranding taxidermy,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Which I think that's basically really important to you.
Yeah, it's really important to me. Not just, you know, when I work with museums, often they have an art collection and anthropology collection, and then they'll have like the natural history collection, and the natural history collection often gets the lowest budget. And it's, you know, how we value animals within, you know, daily life, within our environment, within our museums, we just always are putting them at a lesser. So for me, because my craft, which is an art, just like ceramics or painting, it really is like a sculptural process, it's still demoted to animals because it's with animals. And I'm not saying that I'm a human, so taxidermy should be more valued because it's made by a human, but I'm just saying why, unless taxidermy is used in fashion, which is related to humans, or musical instruments, which is related to humans, it has the like kind of the lowest grade in this system, lowest funding, lowest conservation. You know, it just doesn't get the love that I believe it should have. So by rebranding it, I'm hoping not just, you know, my career, other taxidermists that are up and coming's career, but it's also just taxidermy in general and the respect we give to it. So there's a lot of things that museums have tried where they've done a test when Twitter was a thing. You know, a museum put up a picture of a bad piece of taxidermy and a really good piece of taxidermy in separate tweets, and the bad piece of taxidermy got way more likes, way more shares, way more interest than the good taxidermy. It's because we like to laugh at animals, you know, we like to see these mistakes, we find it funny.
Yeah, I'm sure people have seen, like, when you see the really anthropomorphized, like, scene with, like, I think I saw one site, like, an antique dealer where it was, like, squirrels with, like, boxing gloves on, in a ring, and you're just like, what are we doing?
Yeah, and like I have, like, some love, like Walter Potter, who created, like, the kittens, and he made that taxidermy years ago because he made it for his grandchildren or his kids, and he was entertaining them. And then other people liked it. He'd take it to his local pub, and eventually he built a museum, and it became a thing. And I find that really, like, that is amazing, and that's like a story in its own right. But the problem is, the lasting legacy of that kind of taxidermy, when I meet someone, like, the first thing they'll say is, have you seen? Do you, you know, and it's always, and I'm just trying to show them, yes, I have seen bad taxidermy. Yes, I have seen the overstuffed walrus and the horniman, who I love. But have you seen this? You know, do you know that this could be really beautiful, that it can represent
really
a species?
And
that it can
be really elevated.
Yeah, and it can be done really well and with, like, love, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I was curious about as well is, I think, so you have a son who is 7, right? How did you explain what you do as a job to him?
Yeah, so I do a lot of work with children, from babies all the way up to, like, you know, grown-ups, adults.
Yeah.
And since having a child myself, I've just realised how amazing it is to let them understand death from kind of straight away. So obviously, I didn't stop my job when I had a baby. You know, I'm still doing taxidermy. If I get given an animal, I let him hold it and then he washes his hands, but I let him actually touch it. You know, I want him to understand that life is fragile. You know, if you stand on a spider, it will die. I want him to understand all of the repercussions of that, what that means for the environment. And the offshoot of that is he's a very empathetic person, like almost too much. And he, you know, he's a vegetarian and he talks to people about that. He thinks cars are terrible for the environment. And he's just very conscious of his impact because he understands that things are finite. And obviously that has been sad because he knows I will die and he will die. So from way younger than other kids might, you know, he's saying, what's going to happen when you die, you know, but he understands. And I do believe that it's creating this really like empathetic, beautiful person that hopefully as an adult will take that into whatever he does. So I do stuff in museums where, you know, as young as babies, we do story time. I've got a storybook about a museum. I let them touch things, let them touch the animals, and just let them have interactions with them because, you know, through the media, for instance, children might think that foxes are really vicious and evil and, oh, I'm going to, you know, kick a pigeon, all of these things. But if you can let them have like a gentle, nice interaction with these animals, maybe it can create different memories and just kind of break those negative associations and let them have an opportunity to talk about death. So often a parent will go into a museum with a kid and the kid will go, are these dead? And the answer is, yes, they are. They say, are they real? And the answer is kind of, but the parent doesn't know how they're made. So they're often lost for words. So they kind of say, so what I try and do with museums is create either displays or give talks that give language to the parents, the people, the children. And I do workshops with children where we make the bind up bodies, and then they can go around, they can look at the displays differently, they understand their craft objects as well as a dead animal. Where's the animal come from? Why is it still here? How was it made?
And I think, you know, in the context of, again, talking about ethical taxidermy and animals that have died of natural causes, etc., that's a lot easier to explain to a child than to say, oh, yes, someone decided to shoot that animal and then we turned it into taxidermy. Like, that's a much more brutal way.
Which is generally what most museum collections are made of. So also, I'm a good bridger when I give a talk or do something in a museum that bridges that gap, that can show that it can be different, but these objects are still important. And just be honest. I think that there was a time when taxidermy went out of fashion and museums lost a lot of their collections. You know, because people were embarrassed, but you know,
they just thought, oh, no one's ever going to be interested in that, and didn't put in the time to conserve it, etc. And then it's too far gone to
or they've literally disposed of things. Because they don't want to have that difficult conversation. But that's what museums are for. You know, they're for those difficult conversations.
Well, that's what you would hope. I think I think there's a lot of our culture now where we all like shy away from difficult conversations, and actually, difficult conversations are really important because you become more resilient as a person if you can have those conversations, and actually you can have the words and the understanding as to why certain behaviours are bad when you discuss the bad behaviours, whereas if you just avoid it altogether, you then don't understand the reasoning, you can't argue against it. And I think when we see bad behaviour, it's important to not just be able to like point the finger and say it's bad, but actually reason and explain why, because otherwise we're making ourselves like vulnerable to that bad behaviour.
And working with children and teaching them that animals are an important part of everything. You know, maybe that stops that kid from shooting a swan with a pellet gun, which happens quite a lot. You know, like what is it? Like, what can you do to disrupt that kind of real disregard for animals, something that's weaker than you? As humans, we have this real power complex, you know, that we really want to control, and we do control, but it's like teaching that, you know, we won't be here if we don't. And I really think that if someone learns that very young, that it can help them make decisions later, or just think about everything, like, do I really need that plastic toy? Do I, you know, just like really help them understand, would it be okay to get a second-hand book rather than a brand new one? And it sounds really ridiculous because it's like taxidermy, but I do think that it really helps. And all of my friends' kids all also know about death and animals, and they bring me things, and we have conversations about things, and when their pets die, we can talk about it, you know, and it's like a good stepping stone to the future of like grandparents passing away, or, you know, actual, maybe their parents, like real traumatic things that could happen.
Yeah, it sort of plants that language.
Because we're never
already.
ready for that when those big things happen. But if you can help, you know, it just makes you think about yourself when you're in the world, doesn't it? Do I need to buy that takeaway coffee in that paper cup? You know, do I really need to do that? Or can I not do that? You know, it just, we all struggle with that now, but with the next generation, they really have to be like even more on it, unfortunately. You know?
Yeah. I feel like this conversation has brought up so many, you know, interesting topics, because, we're touching on crafts, but we're also talking about intention and purpose and, you know, being very thoughtful. One thing I do want to touch on a little bit is because we're in one half of your studio, the other half is shared with your partner, and you're both artists, and it is, and you're raising a child together, and the impacts that can have.
So my husband Benjamin Phillips is an illustrator, and we've shared a studio now for, I think it's got to be about 13 years. And as I told you before, off camera, you know, we started in a bedroom in London because I had a studio, but then we couldn't afford, and so I was skinning things next to our bed, which was crazy, and he was working on his computer, and we've always had a dog as well, so all three of us. And then we upgraded to, we rented a house here in Hastings about 10 years ago. And now we have this studio, which we've had for about 8 years, and we've probably got 2 more years before we'll have to move on from this building, potentially, I'm not sure. And that is a worry. So for us, as artists, you often, unless you're lucky enough to have family support financially, which we don't, you know, we're very much, our income is what we have to live off of. And, you know, if things happen, like having to move studio or having a child, they're incredibly disruptive. So we don't have loads of money to, you know, do much extra than like pay our rent for our studio, pay for our house, you know, and have, you know, this lovely life that we love, but we don't go on holidays that, you know.
Yeah, you said to me that haven't gone on holiday for 8 years.
No.
The only time you've gone abroad has been for work.
For work, yes. And I've had projects where I've been really lucky. I told you about, off camera, sorry.
Yeah.
Working with Dublin Museum, the Natural History Museum there, which is also called the Dead Zoo.
Oh,
which is, it's like a sweet name. They were very accommodating because I was doing a project with them and I got pregnant, and the project took a long time. And then thankfully it was delayed. So when I gave birth and the first few months, I was able to have a bit of a break. And then when I had to take work over to the museum, when I was still breastfeeding, they let me take my husband and the baby to the museum, and like I was working, breastfeeding, working.
That's amazing.
It was amazing. And also I'm just so lucky because I have Ben, who is, you know, our partnership in how we make work.
Yeah.
And how we live and how we have our child. We are one unit. So we don't have assistants, but we have each other. So every email we send where we've got to think about money, or, you know, he's my critical partner. So he looks at all my work and says what's wrong with it, you know, and I do the same to him, and it really helps. And the same with childcare, it was very 50-50. So, you know, it's just like a flowing thing. But because we are artists, I hope one day we will be, you know, more comfortable to be able to have less stress financially. But just, if you are a full-time artist, it's, you know, you're self-employed, but you never know what projects are going to come. You never know what's going to happen to you. You know, I was quite poorly towards the end of my pregnancy. So I didn't really work for like over a year. and that's crazy.
Yeah.
But I still managed to keep my business going. I still did, you know, bits, and I was, you know, skinning badgers when I was very pregnant. And I wish there was more photos of that, actually. I kind of, for some reason, I was almost embarrassed I was pregnant. I think because I thought people wouldn't want to employ me, because they thought, oh, she's going to be busy.
I get this a lot now. I'm at the age where a lot of my friends around me are starting families, and, you know, some are in more of a corporate setting, some are more freelance. And yeah, all of them feel very anxious about being open about the fact that they're pregnant, because that worry that you're not going to be given projects, you're going to be passed over for promotions, or if you're freelance, people are going to assume that you're not going to be working at a certain point. And or like the opposite, like then people like pushing onto you like, oh, you should take a whole year off. And it's like, well, maybe I can't afford to do that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't afford to fully, you know. I still
or maybe I don't want to, as you say, like, or, you know, maybe like my partner will be the one doing, the, you know, the childcare, and I will be the one working. Like, there's so many different, so I think you're not alone in feeling like anxious to reveal that they're about to have a child, which is a shame.
It is a shame. But also, you know, with like being self-employed, we're both self-employed, so neither of us, I got like state maternity pay, but, you know, Ben got nothing.
Yeah.
So it's very as artists, I think people look at our life and think, oh, it's so, you know, they're almost
romantic.
like jealous or like annoyed. They think we sit around and do nothing. I think a lot of people think we're constantly working, you're thinking about it when you're in your sleep. You know, every day, like weekends, everything we do as a partnership is about our practices, but also, you know, you don't have sick pay, you don't have holiday pay. So everything is quite careful.
Yeah. And then, as you say, any sort of, you know, all of the things that can happen in life, like having to, you know, take time off work because you're sick, but then also things that happen related to your artistic life, such as you say, like moving studio. And actually the fact that you both share studio, if you do end up having to move.
It's both of us being stuck.
That will both be you having to, like find a space that can house both of you, both of your work that is within distance to your home, to where your child is, exactly the school. That's then the moving costs, and it's both of you being out of work for the time that you're packing up, moving and setting up again. Like all of these things are just like additional stresses. Yeah,
so we're always thinking about that. Like, you know, all of that is like there in our headspace, you know, and so we don't do holidays and stuff because we're constantly, you know, we want to take everything.
You don't want to say no to work.
I don't want to say no to anything. And also because I'm in my late 30s, but I'm still young, relatively, as a taxidermist and stuff. I want to, the more museums I say yes to, the more projects I say yes to. If I say no, they might find someone else. You know, once you have an institution, you often become their taxidermist, you know.
So let's end on a high note with what would be your dream commission. Maybe I don't know if it's like a type of animal that you haven't worked with before, or maybe if you have like a narrative storyboard in your head of something you'd like to do.
I think so. I have two dreams. One is to write a book, which I'm always working on, which is going to be like all about, you know, sustainable, ethical practices within taxidermy. It's like a best practice manual of how you can do it this way. So that's one.
Have you got a publisher for that already?
No, but I would love one.
Okay, so any publishers?
Yes. Yeah, I would love
watching
one.
this.
Yeah. So it's like taking all of the parts of my practice, because that book isn't out there. And then the other one is I really want somehow to take some time away from maybe my museum work, my paid work, to make, to really be able to fully delve into my artwork, because I feel like it's in there and I'm getting it out slowly, but I really need time to. So with my DYCP and my Quest scholarship, so I've been doing that since 2021, and I still feel like I haven't really explored it. So it's not about a particular species particularly, but it's maybe like a body of work. Yeah. And I would love to do that and then show that in a gallery setting, because I, you know, just
Maybe a collect or something
I would
like that.
love to be in collect one day. But yes, just I want to have, so the ultimate end, or not end, there's no end, but the ultimate for me, if I got a piece in collect, it would really make me feel like that's craft.
That rebranding of taxidermy as art and crafts.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be
for me,
a
that's
success story.
So dreamy, and I feel like it is near, like I'm nearly there.
Well, I think like you're the perfect example of someone who's like, let me get to the top of my field and then I can change it from there.
Yeah.
And I think, and make it more inclusive and more welcoming.
Yeah.
And so
and
that's
literally this is how you do it in a book. That's like the dream.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you for coming to Hastings.
Yeah, it's been really, really exciting. I feel like my mind has expanded in a gazillion different ways. I got like a tiny little glimpse into what it's like to think like you for a few hours.
Thank you.
I've linked Jazmine's website below. I hope you'll get to visit some of the museums where her work can be admired in person. And of course, if you have any questions about taxidermy, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them or to get Jazmine's input if I can't. Thank you so much for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment, this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word. Like, share, and subscribe. See you next week.
And I knew my art would never, the art I was currently making wouldn't pay the bills. Oh no. Do you want some more food?
No. I'm not hungry. What is
You're processing.
I'm processing, yeah.
But I knew that...
Sorry about that.
That's okay.